The first thing my flag bridge saw of the Hasiri Concord was not a fleet or a fortress. It was a wall of glass 300 kilometers across. And behind the glass, by the thousands, were people who had been dying for 61 years and had not been allowed to finish. I had the holding field on the main plot before the drive wash from our transit had even dispersed. My sensor chief, Lieutenant Commander Ruiz, read the count off the board in a voice that had gone flat the way voices go flat when the brain refuses to let the throat shake. 3,411 human bodies suspended, each in its own column of stilled blue light, each frozen at the exact second of its worst wound. "Hold the fleet," I said. "Nothing fires. Nobody moves until I read this." The Aldous Vane had been a hospital convoy, not a warship, not a scout, not anything the laws of any decent species would permit a hand to be laid on. She had carried the wounded off the Tennant Reach 41 years before I was born, 3,400 casualties and her crew of medics, and on her white hull she had carried the oldest mark our species still agreed on. The open hand, palm out, the sign that said this vessel does no harm and asks none in return. She had vanished in the deep between Tennant and home. Earth had grieved her as lost. Earth had been wrong. She had not been lost. She had been taken. And the people who took her had not killed her, which I had been raised to think was the worst thing an enemy could do, and which I now understood was not the worst thing at all. Admiral. Ruiz again, the columns. There, he stopped. He was a steady man. I had picked him myself. "Sir, they're warm. The bodies are warm. Cellular activity present. They're not dead. The field's holding them at the moment of injury. Holding them there." I stood and walked to the forward glass of my own bridge, which is a thing an admiral is not supposed to do in a contact situation, and I looked out at the holding field with my own eyes because I did not trust the screens to be telling the truth. It was true. Through 300 kilometers of structured light I could see them. A young man with his hand pressed to a wound in his side, his face caught halfway through a flinch, his mouth open on a breath he had been trying to take for 61 years. A woman in the gray and white of a convoy surgeon, frozen reaching across an operating cradle toward a patient she would never reach. A boy. There was a boy in there. He could not have been more than 9. Somebody's son evacuated off a burning world, and the Concorde had caught his ship and his pain in amber and shelved him. The Hasiri did not believe in death. I would learn that later, in the cold rooms where we took their records apart. They believed death was a failure of preservation, a sloppiness, a waste. They were old, older than our records, older than our oldest carved stone, and in all that age they had become collectors. They moved through the galaxy slowly, patiently, gathering moments of significance and holding them forever in their fields. A war, a first breath, a last word, a wound. They did not kill, they simply did not let things end. They had found the Aldous Vane adrift, her people in agony, 3,400 deaths in progress, and they had judged the moment beautiful, and they had stopped it and kept it. For 61 years they had walked their visitors past my people's suffering, the way a man walks guests past a painting. "Get me the manifest comparison," I said. My voice did not sound like mine. "Confirm hull, confirm identity. I will not act on a guess." The confirmation took 4 minutes. The Aldous Vane's registry plate was still bolted to her broken spine inside the field, scorched but legible, and our archive matched it to the letter. The convoy that Earth had mourned for 2 generations was here intact, and every soul aboard her was still alive inside the worst second of their lives. I have commanded ships for 31 years. I have seen things done to human beings that I will not put into words for as long as I draw breath. I have buried crews. I have written the letters. I thought I had reached the floor of what one species could do to another, and I had built my whole steady professional self on the belief that whatever came next, I would meet it without my hands shaking. My hands were shaking. I put them flat on the cold rail of the forward glass and I made them stop because the bridge was watching me and because the people in the field had waited 61 years and they could wait the 4 minutes it would take me to become the kind of cold a thing like this requires. "Commander Ruiz, sir, designate the holding field as Objective 1. Designate every Concorde structure within transit range as a secondary objective pending survey. Wake the rest of the order of battle, quietly. I want every hull at station keeping and weapons cold until I say otherwise." I turned from the glass and signaled the Concorde, "Open channel. All bands they're likely to hear." "What do I transmit, Admiral?" I looked back once at the boy in the blue light, at his 9-year-old face caught flinching from a fire that had gone out before his grandparents were born, and I felt the thing I had been holding back since the plot first lit go quiet and hard and final inside me, the way water goes to ice. Not violently, not with a shout, but completely, all at once, all the way through. "Tell them Earth has come for its people," I said. "Tell them we are taking them home, and tell them that everything they have built to hold us still is now mine to switch off." The Hasiri answer came 19 minutes later, And it was the most patient, the most reasonable, the most monstrous thing I have ever had said to me. It came as text and as voice and as a slow rotating glyph on my plot, and it was delivered without heat, without fear, in the tone of a curator addressing a man who has wandered into a gallery and put his hand on the glass. "You are mistaken," the Concord said. "Nothing here is dying. Nothing here is dead. We have preserved your moment of greatest meaning. We have honored it. We have kept it perfect across 61 of your years while your own kind forgot it. You have come a long way to be angry at a kindness. Look again, primitive. We have saved them from the one thing your species cannot bear. We have saved them from ending. You should be grateful. We will, of course, permit you to view the collection." I read it twice. Then I had Ruiz patch me through to the whole fleet. Every ship, every officer, every rating standing watch in the largest assembly Earth had put into the deep in my lifetime. And I told them what we had found, in plain words, with nothing softened, because they had a right to know exactly what we were here to undo. And when I had finished telling them, the channel did not erupt. There was no roar. That is not what cold sounds like. What came back to me, ship by ship, was acknowledgement. Flat, steady. 300 and some captains and their crews receiving the order and understanding it and beginning, without drama, to do the work. We had not come to argue with the HFY Concord about whether what they had done was a kindness. We had come to turn off their machines and carry our people out of the dark, and to make certain by the end of it that no field in this part of the galaxy would ever again be permitted to hold a single dying human still for a collector's pleasure. The Concord thought it had captured a moment. It had captured a debt, and I was the man Earth had sent to collect it. My name is Admiral Tomas Okonkwo Reyes, and I had brought 406 warships through the deep to a system the Concord called, in our intercepted records, the Long Gallery. We did not name our force. The crew started calling it the Recovery on the first day, and the name stuck because it was honest. We had not come to conquer. We had come to take back what was ours and to close permanently the hand that had held it. The Long Gallery was not a single field. That was the first thing the survey teams brought me, 11 hours in, and it was the thing that turned my cold from a personal cold into an operational one. The holding field over the Aldous Vein was one exhibit among hundreds. The Concord had built a system the way a museum builds wings. We mapped them as the fleet spread out across the gallery on my command, not firing, not yet, just looking with every instrument we had, because I would not switch off a single field until I knew exactly what each one was holding. There were fields full of starlight from suns that had died. There were fields holding the last seconds of species I did not recognize, whole peoples caught at the instant of some catastrophe and shelved. There were fields holding things that were simply old, a storm, a migration, a war between powers whose names had rotted out of the galactic record. And there were 9 fields holding humans, 9. The Aldous Vein was the largest. The others were smaller takings, a survey ship, a family transport, a deep-range scout that had gone silent in my grandfather's time and been mourned and forgotten. 11,000 and some human beings all told, across the 9, every one of them suspended at their worst moment and kept there, alive, aware, for years no number could make decent. I had Ruiz read me the worst of it because I made myself hear it. The fields were not merciful. Stasis is not sleep. The Concord's preservation held the body and the mind together at the instant of injury, and the instruments said, and the captured HFY later confirmed without the smallest shame, that the preserved were aware, that every one of those 11,000 people had been screaming inside in a single endless instant for as long as the Concorde had owned them, that the curators considered the awareness essential. A preserved moment, they said, must include the one experiencing it, or the preservation is incomplete. I sat with that for exactly as long as I let myself, which was the length of one breath, and then I put it where I put everything that would stop me from working if I held it, and I started giving orders. "Wing commanders to the flag," I said. "All 9 now." They came on the comm, 9 faces in 9 frames, hard people I had chosen for exactly this kind of day. I laid the gallery out for them. I told them what the fields held. I watched the same thing move across all 9 faces that had moved across mine, and I watched all 9 of them do what I had done with it, which was set it down and pick up the work. "We do this by procedure," I said, "not by feeling. Feeling is why we came. Procedure is how we win. Every field that holds a human being is to be surveyed, mapped, and prepared for controlled release by a recovery team. Nobody pulls a person out of stasis until the medics are standing by to catch them, because the instant we release that field, 61 years of wound resume in 1 second, and if we are not ready, we will have brought our people all this way only to watch them die in our arms. Is that understood?" It was understood. "The Concord will tell you this is a kindness," I said. "They will tell you the people inside are at peace. They are not at peace. They are in agony, held still. We are not vandalizing a museum. We are stopping a torture that has run for 61 years. Carry that. Don't lose it. And don't let it make you fast. Fast is how we lose them. Commander Adeyemi, who had the second wing and the steadiest hands in the fleet, asked the question I had been waiting for. Admiral, the conquered force, what's it doing? That was the strangest part, and the part that told me most clearly what kind of enemy we faced. The Concorde was not defending the Long Gallery, not in any way I recognized. There were Hasiri ships in the system. Slow, vast, beautiful things, more grown than built, drifting between the exhibits like attendants. They outnumbered us. By our best read, they outmassed us, and they were doing nothing. They had not raised a screen. They had not powered a weapon. They were watching us with the same mild, patient, curatorial attention they had turned on the dying for 61 years, and the only signals they sent were more of the same. You may view the collection, they told us, over and over in that reasonable voice. You may not disturb the preservation. The preservation is permanent. It is not yours to end. Nothing here belongs to you. We found it. We saved it. You will understand in time as your species matures why ending is the only true cruelty. They genuinely did not believe we could take it from them. They had been in this galaxy so long and had held so many moments so completely that the idea of a thing they had preserved being released had simply gone out of their minds as a possibility. We were not a threat to them. We were a curiosity that had arrived to admire the exhibit. The notion that we would reach into their fields and switch them off, one by one, and walk 11,000 of their treasures out into the light. That was not in their understanding of how the universe worked. I intended to put it there. Adeyemi, I said, the Conquered won't fight for the gallery because they don't think we can touch it. So we're going to touch it. We start with the Vane. We take her people out first, in full view of every Hasiri ship in this system, and we let them watch a moment they swore was permanent end in our hands. And then we do it again and again, until there are no more humans in their fields, and they have learned, in front of the whole patient galaxy, that there is one collector in the dark older and harder than they are, and it is us, and we have come to take our dead back from forever. The recovery moved. It did not move the way a fleet moves to battle. There was no charge, no opening salvo, no line of fire drawn across the dark. It moved the way a recovery operation moves, deliberate, spread every ship to its station, the medical hulls forward, and the warships ringing them in a sphere with their guns cold and their crews watch patient Hasiri for the first sign that the patients would break. And over the Aldous Vane, in the blue light, 3,411 of my people went on screaming silently into a fire that had died 61 years ago and waited, without knowing they waited, for the first human hand in 2 generations to reach in and let them finish their breath at last. The first release nearly broke us, and I had ordered it that way on purpose because I needed to know the cost before I committed 11,000 lives to it. We chose one column, one man. The recovery board picked him because his wound was the least catastrophic of the 3,000 on the Vane, a fragment in the shoulder, survivable, the kind of thing a convoy surgeon mends in an hour. The medics rigged a release cradle around his column and stood ready with everything a modern fleet can put between a human being and death. Dr. Amani Sardo ran the team. I watched from the flag, and I had the whole fleet watching too, and I had the channel to the Concorde open so they could watch as well. On my mark, Sardo said, releasing field in 3, 2, 1. The blue light went out, and 61 years happened to that man in a single second. His shoulder, which had been caught at the instant of the fragment striking it, finished the wound. He fell forward out of the dead light into Sardo's cradle with a cry that was the resumption of a cry begun before I was born, and his body, which had been holding one heartbeat suspended for 6 decades, tried to have all the heartbeats it had missed at once. His heart stopped. The medics had it again in 11 seconds. He bled the way a fresh wound bleeds because to his flesh it was fresh, and they had hands on it before the second pulse, and they held him through the thing his body did when it understood that time had started again. He lived. He came back screaming a name, a woman's name, over and over, and Sardo's people held him down and held him together and brought him back. From the edge of the wound he'd been frozen on, and when he finally understood he was warm, that he was being held, that the fire was out and out for good, he wept. He was 40-some years old in his flesh, and 100-some in the calendar, and he wept like the boy he had been when they took him. And Dr. Sardo knelt in the cradle and held his head and told him, over and over, the only thing there was to tell him. You're home. You're home. We came back for you. You're home. I had the whole fleet watching that. 300 ships, every officer, every rating. I had the Concorde watching it too. Admiral, Sardo said into the flag channel, her voice steady through the wet in it. Patient is stable. Release protocol is survivable. We lost his heart for 11 seconds and we got it back. With the full medical hulls catching them, with this cradle, we can do this. We can bring them out. But it has to be one at a time, and it has to be slow, and we will lose some. The worst wounds won't survive the resumption no matter what we do. I want you to know that going in. Some of the people in those fields are only alive because they're frozen. Releasing them is the kindest thing we can do, and it will kill a number of them. And there is no version of this where that isn't true. Understood, Doctor, I said. How many do you estimate we lose? Of the 11,000, if we do everything right. A pause. Several hundred, maybe 1,000. The Vane's casualties were the worst. They were dying when they were taken. Some of them have no survivable moment to come back to. 1,000. The Concorde had taken 11,000 living people and kept them in agony for 61 years, and the kindest thing the most advanced medical force my species had ever assembled could do was release them into a death some of them had been spared only by the captivity. I have done hard arithmetic in my life. That was the hardest. To free them, we had to kill some of them. To end the torture, we had to let the wound finish. There was no clean number. There was only the choice between 11,000 people held forever in their worst second, and 11,000 people allowed, at last, to live or to die as living things do. I gave the order to proceed. Bring them out, Dr. Sardo. All of them. Every field. The strong first, to build the recovery line, then the grave cases, with full teams. And we fight for every single one, and we let go of the ones we cannot hold. And we do not, my voice did not break. I made certain of that. We do not leave one human being in a Hasiri field. Not one. If they die warm, in our hands, in the light, with their names known and a human face the last thing they see. Not in the blue, never again in the blue. The Concorde chose that moment to speak to me directly. It had been listening. Of course it had. It had watched the release of the man with the shoulder wound, watched his heart stop and start, watched him weep in Sardo's arms, and it had understood none of it. Because to understand it, the Concorde would have had to believe that ending could be mercy, and that was the one belief 61 million years had bred out of them. You have damaged the preservation, the Concorde said, and for the first time there was something under the patience, not fear, not yet, but the affront of a curator who has watched a visitor put a thumb through a canvas. The moment is broken. It cannot be restored. You have destroyed a thing that was perfect and permanent, and you call it a rescue. Do you understand what you have done? You have killed him. He was alive in the field. Now he will age. Now he will end. You have taken eternity from him, and you call it mercy. You are not saviors. You are the thing we preserve against. You are ending, walking. Yes, I said, we are. I had Ruiz hold the channel open so the Concorde could hear the whole of what I said next, because I wanted it on their record, in their archive, preserved forever in their own perfect blue light if they liked. You have it exactly right, I told the long gallery, and the whole patient Concorde behind it. We are ending, walking. That is what we are. Every one of those people in your fields was given a life that runs out, and a death that comes, and the right to meet both as a free thing and not as an exhibit. You took that from them. You looked at 3,400 human beings dying with dignity, and you decided their dignity was yours to shelve. So yes, I am going to walk through your long gallery, and I am going to end every preservation that holds one of my people, and some of them will die when I do it, and they will die free, which is a thing you cannot give and have never understood. You think ending is the only cruelty. You have it backwards. You are about to learn how far backwards. We are coming through every field you have, and when we are done, you will have learned the one thing your whole long patient age never taught you. Some things are supposed to end, and we are the species that ends them. The Concorde tried to stop the recovery without firing a shot, and the way it tried is worth setting down because it was the most alien thing about them, and the thing that hardened me most. It did not jam our instruments or screen the fields or move its ships to block us. It reasoned. For the first 3 days of the Vane's recovery, as the line ran and the cradle cycled and one human being after another came out of the blue light into Sardo's hands, the Concorde transmitted continuously on every band a patient and meticulous case for why we should stop. It was not propaganda. It was worse than propaganda. It was sincere. It sent us the provenance of the Aldous Vane's collection when it had been acquired, by which curator, the careful judgment that had gone into preserving it whole. It sent us appraisals of individual pieces, by which it meant individual human beings, explaining the particular value of this wound or that face, the rarity of the surgeon caught mid-reach, the exceptional composition of the boy. It sent us, in the tone of a docent who fears a masterpiece is about to be cut from its frame, a plea to consider what would be lost, not the lives. It had no concept of the lives as losses, but the moments, the perfect held instants we were destroying every time a cradle cycled and a body resumed. You are tearing pages from a book that took us 61 years to bind, it told us. Each release is irreversible. The moment, once resumed, is gone forever. You will never see this collection again. No one will. You are not freeing them. You are erasing them. Stop and view them, and understand what you have. They are immortal in our keeping. You are about to make them mortal, which is to say, you are about to make them disappear. I had Ruiz log every word of it and answer none of it, and I told the recovery line to keep working, and I watched the Concorde fail to understand, across 3 full days, why its perfect reasoning moved no one. It moved no one because it was built on the one thing we in the Concorde could never share. The Concorde believed the held instant was the person. We knew the person was the life that came after, the years the boy would get, the patients the surgeon would still save, the woman whose name the man with the shoulder wound had been screaming, who turned out to be his sister, who turned out to be alive on Earth, an old woman now, who came to the recovery halls when we brought them home and held her brother who was the same age she'd last seen him and wept over a face 2 generations younger than her own. The Concorde saw a frozen second and called it eternity. We saw a life with its pause button jammed down and called it a crime. There was no argument between those two views. There was only which one had the fleet. So we ran the line, and every cradle that cycled was an answer the Concorde could not refute. And by the 3rd day, the transmissions had begun, just slightly, to repeat themselves, the way a man's argument repeats when he has run out of new reasons and cannot accept that he has lost. We pulled the grave cases last, as I had ordered, with the full teams, and those were the hours that aged the recovery crews fastest. The Vane had been a hospital convoy, and her worst cases were the worst there were. People who had been 3 breaths from death when the Concorde caught them, held for 61 years in those 3 breaths, and who had no survivable second on the far side of the field. Sardo's people brought them out anyway, one at a time, with everything, and fought for each one, and most of them they could not hold. I watched a medic named Oyalaran work for 40 minutes on a woman whose body simply could not be made to live past the wound it resumed into, and lose her, and write down her name, and stand up and call for the next cradle and do it again. He did that for 2 days. They all did. They did not break, and they did not turn aside, and they did not once leave a body in the blue to spare themselves the loss of catching it. That is the cost the Concorde never counted in all its appraisals, not the moments, the medics. What it costs a living species to reach into 100 fields of hell death and pull out everyone, knowing some will die in your hands the instant you free them, and to do it anyway, one cradle at a time, because the alternative is to leave a human being frozen forever in the worst second of their life. And that is not an alternative, and it never was. We worked the long gallery for 9 days. I will not pretend it was a battle, because it was not, and the men and women who did it would not thank me for dressing it up as one. It was harder than a battle. A battle ends. This did not end for 9 days, and every hour of it was the same hour, repeated 11,000 times, the cradle and the count and the blue light going out and the second of resumed wound and the fight for the heart and the held body and the name cried out and, if we were good and lucky, the breath that finally finished after 61 years. I built it like an operation because that was the only way to survive it. I will give you the shape of it because the shape is the HFY. The shape is the thing my species did that the Concorde could not have done in 100 million years. We did not free the Aldous vein all at once. We could not. The medical hulls could process a release every few minutes, and there were 11,000 of them, and so we built a line. Recovery Wing 1 took the vein. The cradles ran in shifts around the clock, the medics rotating off only when Sardo pulled them by force because a tired hand on a release is a dead patient. Wing 2 took the survey ship in the 3rd field. Wing 3 took the family transport. We spread across the gallery and we ran the line in 9 places at once, and the warships held the sphere around them all, guns cold, watching the Concorde, and the Concorde watched us take its collection apart. The micro payoffs, if you want to call them that, came one human being at a time. A surgeon, the woman I had seen frozen reaching across her operating cradle, came out of the field with her hands still reaching and finished the motion into Sardo's arms and asked, before anything else, before her own pain, where her patient was. We had freed the patient 9 hours before we brought her to him. They had been 40 centimeters apart for 61 years, and we closed the distance and they wept and we moved to the next column, the boy, the 9-year-old. I went down to the recovery hull myself for the boy, which an admiral should not do, and I stood at the back of the bay while Sardo's best team rigged his cradle, because I had looked at his flinching face for 9 days and I needed to see him breathe. His wound was survivable. He came out of the blue light screaming for his mother, who was not in any field, who had died 61 years ago on the world he'd been evacuated from, and he was a child who had been in agony for longer than most of the people. Holding him had been alive, and he did not understand any of it, and a young rating named Kwesi Boateng, who had a boy that age at home, picked him up out of the cradle and held him against the scarred plate of his chest armor and said nothing at all, just held him, and walked him slow circles around the bay, until the screaming became crying and the crying became the long shaking quiet of a child who has finally been put down somewhere safe. We lost people. Sardo had told me we would, and we did. The grave cases, the ones who had been dying when they were taken, the ones whose worst second had no survivable other side, we brought them out anyway. Because the alternative was to leave them in the field forever. And that was not an alternative. We brought them out with full teams and every machine and every drug, and we fought for each one. And a number of them we could not hold. And they died in the light, in our hands, with their names spoken aloud and a human face above them, and we recorded every name, and we did not look away from a single death, because they had been looked away from for 61 years, and that was over. 871. That was the final count of the ones we could not save. 871 human beings who came out of the blue light only far enough to die free. I have their names. The fleet has their names. They will be read every year aloud for as long as Earth keeps faith with its dead, which is forever, because that is the difference between us and the Concorde. We hold our dead in memory and let their bodies go, and they held the bodies and let the dignity rot. 10,129 we saved. 10,129 people who had been stolen and shelved and tortured in stillness for 2 generations walked, or were carried, out of the long gallery and into the medical hulls of the recovery and slept, for the first time in 61 years, in actual sleep in a warm bunk, under a human blanket, with the blue light gone out of them for good. And all 9 days the Concorde watched. I want to be precise about what the Concorde did during those 9 days, because it is the heart of why the thing happened the way it ended. It did not fight. I kept the sphere up and the guns cold, and I waited every hour for the patience to break, for the vast-grown ships to finally raise a screen and contest the taking of their treasure. They never did. They argued. They lectured. They transmitted on every band a steady, reasonable, endless explanation of the harm we were doing, the moments we were destroying, the perfection we were violating, the eternity we were stealing from the very people we carried out. They were not afraid of our guns. They did not, I think, fully believe our guns were real, any more than they believed our rescue was real. We were a force of ending loose in a place built to deny that ending existed, and the Concorde met us the only way its nature allowed, which was to keep insisting, with perfect patience, that what was happening could not be happening. But somewhere in those 9 days, ship by ship, the insistence changed. I heard it first in the survey reports, and then in the Concorde's own transmissions. The patient certainty thinned. The lectures grew longer, more repetitive, the way a man's words grow long and repetitive when the thing he is explaining has stopped being true and he has not yet let himself know it. By the 7th day, the Concorde had stopped telling us that the release could not happen and started telling us that it should not. By the 9th, as the last grave cases came out of the last field and the long gallery's human exhibits stood empty and dark, the Concorde had stopped telling us anything about the preservation at all. It had begun instead to ask us a question. The same question, over and over, in that ancient patient voice, with something new underneath it that I did not at first recognize because I had never expected to hear it from them. What will you do now? The Concorde asked the recovery. What will you do now? What will you do now? It was fear. The oldest collectors in the dark had watched a younger species walk into their permanent gallery and prove that nothing they held was permanent, and now that the proof was complete and the field stood empty, the Concorde had finally understood that the rule it had been breaking for 61 years was a rule that could be turned on the collector as easily as the collected. They had held 11,000 of our people in the worst second of their lives, and now they were asking, with the first fear they had felt in 100 million years, what I intended to do with the rest of their patient, permanent, monstrous age. On the 4th day of the recovery, I had the engineers take a Concorde field apart, because I had decided early that we would not leave this system depending on the Hasiri to tell us how their machines worked. If we were going to open 11,000 fields without killing the people inside, we needed to own the science of the blue light ourselves, down to the last principle, and not be at the mercy of a curator's mood. The field over the Aldous vein was too large and too full to risk, but the long gallery held empty fields too. Preservation rigs that had been built and never filled, or emptied long ago of whatever they once held, and we took one of those, towed it to a standoff distance behind a screen of warships, and Chief Engineer Lindqvist and her people went into it the way a bomb disposal team goes into a device. Slowly, with everything recorded, assuming nothing. What they found turned my cold a degree colder. The blue light was not a force field. It was not stasis as we understood the word, a simple freezing of time inside a bubble. It was finer and crueler than that. The Concorde's preservation reached into the held thing and stopped it at the level of the moment itself. Not the body alone, but the bodies Experience, the firing of the nerve, the registering of the pain, the awareness of the awareness. It did not pause a person. It pinned them. It took the single worst instant of a life and made that instant the whole of the life, sustained, conscious, unending. And it did this with a precision and an elegance that told me the Concorde had refined it across an age, perfected it, the way a master craftsman perfects a tool he loves. They didn't do this carelessly, Admiral, Lindqvist told me. And she was not a woman given to feeling, and her voice was not steady. They did it beautifully. Every line of it is optimized to keep the experience intact. They could have held the bodies and let the minds go dark. It would have been easier. They chose not to. They chose the awareness. They wanted the moment whole, and the moment includes the one feeling it. This isn't a side effect. This is the design. I had her record all of it, every principle, every line, and I had it sent home with the survey because I wanted Earth to know exactly what had been done to its people, in exact technical truth, with no softening. And I had her keep working because the same understanding that let me grasp the cruelty was the understanding that would let us undo it. And over the days that followed, Lindqvist's people learned to open a field not by smashing it, which killed instantly, but by releasing it in a controlled collapse that gave the medics those few seconds they needed to catch the resuming body. Every life we saved because she took the Concorde's own cruelty apart and turned its principles into a door. We also took a curator. It was not planned. On the sixth day, a single Concorde attendant craft drifted in close to the Aldous Vanes field, closer than the others ever came, and held there, watching the recovery line work, and did not withdraw when we hailed it. I gave the order to bring it in. We did it gently, a tractor envelope, no fire, and we brought the craft into a sealed bay, and we met, for the first time, one of the Hasiri face to face. It was old. Everything about it said old. It was not a single body in the way we are single bodies. It was a slow, deliberate arrangement of grown matter and held light, something that had clearly not hurried for a very long time, and it regarded us, through the bay's containment, with the same mild curatorial attention the whole Concorde had turned on us from the start. It was not afraid. It had come, I think, to see the Vandals up close. I had it questioned, not harmed. I want that on the record. We did not harm it. That was not who we were here. But questioned thoroughly by the intelligence wing and by me across days in the cold sealed room. And what it told us, freely, without the smallest shame, is the thing I carry worst of all. It confirmed the awareness. It confirmed the design. And when I asked it, when I made myself ask it plainly, across the containment field, whether it had known, across 61 years, that the 3,400 human beings in the Aldous Vanes field were conscious and suffering, it answered me without a pause. Of course, it said. That is the value of the peace. A wound preserved without the one who suffers it is only damage. Damage is common. Suffering, held whole and perfect across time, that is rare. That is worth keeping. Your convoy was a fine acquisition. The variety of the wounds, the youth of some of the injured, the surgeon reaching for the patient she could not save. The composition was exceptional. We were fortunate to find it. You should understand that we did not choose it carelessly. We do not collect the ordinary. I have killed men whose crimes were nothing beside that sentence, and I did not kill the curator, and the not killing of it was one of the hardest disciplines of my life, and I held to it because we were not there to do to the Concorde what the Concorde did. But I will tell you that I left the room when it had finished speaking, and I stood alone in a corridor for a while, and I made my hands stop shaking again, for the second time in that system, before I went back to work. I will tell you when I decided what we would do with the Concorde, because the moment is exact, and I have never doubted it since. It was the morning of the 10th day, with the last human field gone dark, and the medical hulls full of the living and the dead, and Commander Adeyemi brought me the survey of the wider Concorde that the intelligence wing had been building while the recovery ran. I had ordered it on the first day, quietly, because a man does not walk into one gallery and assume it is the only one. It was not the only one. The long gallery was a single site. The Hasiri Concorde held 290 such sites that we had so far located, scattered across a span of space it would take generations to cross, and the survey was confident the true number was higher. 290 galleries, each one a collection, each one full of preserved moments held in the blue light forever, including, Adeyemi laid this in front of me without a word, because there were no words here for it, including the people of 41 other species. Not all of them, not most of them. But across the 290 galleries, the Concorde had taken and shelved the living of 41 peoples besides us. Wounds, births, last words, catastrophes. The Concorde had been doing to the galaxy, slowly, patiently, for longer than there had been eyes to see it, exactly what it had done to the Aldous Vane. We were not the first species to be collected. We were, I decided in that exact moment, going to be the last. I did not decide it in rage. I want that understood. because the Concorde, when it finally grasped what was coming, called it rage, and it was not. Rage is hot, and it burns out. What I felt looking at the survey of 290 galleries was the opposite of hot. It was the cold settling all the way down, past the personal, past the human, into something that felt less like a feeling and more like a law. The Concorde had built its entire age on the denial of ending. Very well. We were the species that ends things. There was a symmetry to it that I have never been able to unfeel. I called the wing commanders to the flag, all 9, the same hard faces, tireder now, and I put the survey in front of them, and I told them what I intended. The Concorde holds 290 galleries, I said. It holds the living of 41 species besides our own. We came for our people. We have them. We could leave now, and Earth would call this a victory, and Earth would be right. But I am not going to leave, and I am going to tell you why, and then I am going to ask whether you will do it with me, because what I am about to order is larger than the orders I was sent with, and every one of you has the right to say no. They did not say no. I will carry the way they looked at me to my grave. The Concorde does not believe in ending, I said. It has built 290 prisons of light on that belief, and it has filled them with the suffering of 41 peoples over an age so long our records can't hold it. It will not stop. It cannot stop. Stopping is not in its nature. As long as the Concorde exists, it will go on finding the dying and the newborn and the grieving of every species young enough to be caught, and it will shelve them forever and call it kindness. There is no negotiating with that. You cannot deter a thing that does not fear ending. You can only end it. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to go to all 290 galleries, and we are going to open every field, and we are going to carry out the living of 41 species and let them finish their breath as free things. And we are going to switch off the long patience for good, not in anger, in closure. We are going to settle the entire debt at once. Adeyemi asked the only question that mattered. That's not a fleet operation, Admiral, that's a war. We came with 406 ships, 290 galleries, 41 species of preserved, across half the reach. We don't have the hulls. We don't have the medical capacity. We don't have the years. No, I said, we don't yet. And here is the part the Concorde never understood, the part no patient ancient collector could understand, because it had spent 100 million years believing that age was strength and that nothing young could move fast enough to matter. I sent for the rest of Earth. I sent the survey home, the 290 galleries, the 41 species, the 11,000 of our own, and the long arithmetic of the dead, and I sent with it my intention and my reasoning and my request in plain words to the people who had the authority to grant it. And Earth, which had grieved the Aldous vein for 2 generations, and had just learned she was not lost but stolen and held in agony all that time, did not debate it for long. The recovery had been 406 ships. What Earth sent to finish what the recovery had started was not a fleet. It was an industry. It was the largest mobilization my species had attempted since the wars that made us a spacefaring people, and it did not come all at once because it could not, and that was the point. It came in waves steadily for years, the way a patient species would build something, except that we built it fast, and we built it cold, and we built it for one purpose only. Medical hulls by the hundred, each one a floating recovery line. Tender ships and yard ships that could open a Concorde field without killing what it held, because by then we had taken the long gallery's own machines apart and learned exactly how the blue light worked. And warships. Enough warships to ring every gallery in the reach in a cold sphere and dare the patient Concorde to break its patience, knowing that if it did, we would finally have the fight, and we would win it. Because a thing that does not believe in ending does not know how to fight one that does. We called the whole of it the closing, not the wrath, not the vengeance. The closing because that is what it was. The closing of an account that had been left open across an age. The closing of 290 doors. The closing of the long patience itself. And we went gallery by gallery for 11 years, and we opened every field, and we carried out the living of 41 species, and we read the names of everyone we could not save in 41 tongues aloud, and we switched off the blue light wherever we found it, and we did not stop, and we did not tire of it, and we did not soften, until there was not one preserved moment of suffering left held still in all the reach of the HFY Concorde. The Concorde watched us do it. For 11 years, the oldest patient thing in the dark watched a young species methodically dismantle the work of its entire existence and never once raised a hand to stop us, because by the end of the first year it had understood the one thing it had spent 100 million years not knowing, and the understanding had taken the fight out of it before the fight could start. The decision to build the closing was not made on my flag bridge. It could not be. What I had requested of Earth was larger than any admiral's authority, and I knew it when I sent the survey home. And I knew the answer would not be quick. and I made my peace with holding station over an emptied long gallery for as long as it took. It took 6 weeks. I have read the records of those 6 weeks since, the arguments that ran on Earth and across the colonies while my fleet waited, and I will set down the shape of them, because the way my species decided to do this matters as much as the doing. There were those who said, leave it. We had our people. The Aldous vein was avenged, if avenged is even the word for carrying your stolen wounded home. To go further, to commit Earth to a 15-year campaign across half the reach against the oldest power in the dark, for the sake of 41 species, most of whom did not know they had been wronged. That was not vengeance, the cautious said. That was empire, and Earth had bled itself white once already learning not to be one. Let the Concorde keep its other galleries. Bring our admiral home. There were those who said the opposite, and harder. They had seen the recordings, the boy, the surgeon, the awareness, the curator's mild voice explaining the value of a held child. They said a species that could do that, and would go on doing it forever to anyone young enough to be caught, was not a thing you walked away from once you knew. They said the galaxy had been letting the Concorde collect its dead for 100 million years because no one had ever been willing to pay the cost of stopping it, and that Earth, having found the truth, was now the only people who could not pretend not to know. And there were those, and this is the argument that won, who said it was not about vengeance or empire at all. It was about whether ending meant anything. The Concorde had built its whole age on the proposition that the unending was a kindness and the ending a cruelty, and it had made 11,000 of our people into the proof. If we took our 11,000 home and left the rest, we would be conceding the proposition, agreeing that ending was a thing you did only for your own, in your own grief, a small parochial cruelty. But if we went to every gallery and opened every field and carried out the living of peoples we had never met and owed nothing, and let them finish their breath as free things, then we would be saying something the galaxy had never heard said, that ending is not a cruelty at all, that it is a right, that it belongs to every living thing, and that a power which steals it must be made to give it back, wherever it has been stolen, to whomever it was stolen from, whether they are yours or not. That is the argument Earth chose. Not the smallest grief and not the largest empire, but the widest justice. And once it was chosen, my species did the thing it does that no patient ancient power can do. It moved. I have stood in a lot of dry docks in my life. I've never seen anything like what Earth threw into the dark in the years that followed. The yards ran without pause. The medical service, which had never in our history needed to recover 4 million people from suspended death, invented itself anew, ship class by ship class, protocol by protocol, training a generation of resumption medics for a kind of casualty that had not existed before the long gallery. The intelligence wing turned the survey of 290 galleries into a campaign plan that read less like a war and more like a demolition. Schedule each gallery a door to be opened in turn, and the warships came, not because we expected the Concorde to fight, by then we suspected it would not, but because a closing must be guarded, and because Earth had decided that when it walked into the oldest cruelty in the dark, it would walk in with enough force that no patient ancient thing would mistake mercy for weakness. We did not name it the Wrath, I have said that. The crews who built it and crewed it chose the closing, and the choosing of that name was itself the argument made flesh. We were not avenging. We were closing the fields, closing the galleries, closing an account that had been left open across an age, and closing forever the one capability that had kept it open. When the first wave of the closing transited out to join my waiting fleet over the long gallery, 5,100 hulls strong with more building behind them, I read the order of battle off my own plot, and I understood that I was looking at the disproportion the whole galaxy would remember, that the Concorde had taken 11,000 of our wounded and held them 61 years, and that Earth's answer was a 15-year campaign of 9 peoples and 5,000 ships to empty 290 prisons of light and end. The long patience for good, one stolen convoy, the largest mobilization in human history. That was the ratio. That was the message, and the Concorde, watching the closing assemble over its emptied long gallery, finally began to understand that it had not acquired a fine piece 61 years ago. It had pulled the one thread in the dark that, when pulled, unravels everything. The first non-human gallery we opened was a year into the closing, at a site the Concorde called the Tide of Halloran's Star, and it taught me that the debt we had come to collect was older and wider than even the survey had made me feel. The Tide held the living of a species we came to call the Sethri, because their own name for themselves did not survive in any record we could find. They were a water people, gilled, long-limbed, and the Concorde had taken a migration of them, an entire seasonal passage, tens of thousands of Sethri swimming the long currents between their breeding shoals, and had frozen the whole migration at the instant a Concorde, harvesting field swept through it. The Sethri in the tide had been held for what our best estimate put at 400,000 years. Their civilization was gone. We searched. The world they had migrated across was still there, still blue, still warm, and there were Sethri on it still. But they were a young people now, risen again from whatever the Concorde's harvest had left, with no memory of the migration that had been taken, no record of the 40,000 of their ancestors hanging in the blue light above their sky. The Concorde had reached into a species' deep past and stolen a piece of it so long ago that the species had forgotten it had ever been whole. We faced a choice at the tide that we faced nowhere else. The 40,000 Sethri in the field had no world to return to that would know them. Their language was dead. Their kind below would meet them as ghosts. For a day I weighed whether opening the tide was a mercy or a cruelty, whether 40,000 beings 400,000 years out of their time would not be kinder left in the blue. And then I put the question to the young Sethri below because it was theirs to answer and not mine, and they sent up, slowly, across the language barrier, across the strangeness, a single reply that I have kept. "Bring them down," the young Sethri said. "We will learn who they were. We will hold them. They are not ghosts. They are family that was stolen. Bring them down, and we will teach them the currents again." We opened the tide. We lost some. 400,000 years is a long time to come back from, and not every body survived the resuming, but most of them lived, and we brought 40,000 Sethri down out of the blue light to a people who had forgotten them and chose in a day to remember. I watched the first of them enter the water. I watched the young Sethri gather around the old migration, the way you gather around something holy. It was the first time in the closing that I understood we were not only collecting Earth's debt, we were collecting the whole galaxy's, every account the Concorde had left open across an age, and closing each one in the only currency that mattered, which was return. It is also why Earth never wavered through the 11 years that followed, and why I can say, without flinching, that the closing was the largest sustained act my species has ever undertaken and the one I am least ashamed of. Earth did not do it alone. In the end, that was not the original plan, and it became the plan because the freed peoples would not have it otherwise. The Sethri sent ships, young, simple ships, but crews who knew their own waters and could catch their own resuming kin better than any human medic could. So did others, as we opened gallery after gallery and woke species after species to the knowledge that their stolen dead hung in the blue. The recovery had been 406 human hulls. The closing by its 7th year was a coalition of 9 spacefaring peoples, and the slow-gathering will of 41 who had been wronged, all of them moving behind the cold human spine of it, because Earth had been the one to find the long gallery, and Earth had been the one to decide that finding was not enough. I am proud of that, I will say it plainly, old as I am. We did not have to go past the Aldous vein. We had our people, we could have gone home heroes. Instead, we looked at 290 galleries and 41 wronged peoples and 100 million years of held suffering, and we decided that a debt is a debt, whether it is owed to you or to a stranger 400,000 years dead, and we closed all of it, every account to the last field. Because that is what it means to be the species that ends things, not that we end the living, but that we will not leave the unending standing. Not every gallery was grief. I want to set down one that was not, because it changed something in how the freed people saw us, and because it is the closest thing to joy the whole long closing held. It was the 5th year, at a site the Concorde called the Hall of Small Beginnings. The survey had flagged it as anomalous before we arrived. The fields there did not read as wounds or catastrophes or last words. They read as something the Concorde almost never bothered to collect, because the Concorde prized the dramatic and the terminal, the great grief and the great end. The Hall of Small Beginnings held the opposite. It held births. A curator somewhere in the Concorde's long memory had developed a taste the others did not share. It had gathered, across the galaxy, the instance of beginning, the first breath of a newborn of this species, the hatching of that one, the moment a parent of some long-vanished people first held its child. Tens of thousands of them, across hundreds of peoples, every one frozen at the single most hopeful second a life contains, held forever just shy of the breath that starts it. The Concorde had stolen the galaxy's first breaths and shelved them in the blue. We opened the Hall of Small Beginnings over 6 days, and it was the only gallery in the whole closing where the recovery crews did not age. Because what came out of those fields, when the blue light went out, was not a resumed wound or a finished death. It was a first breath completed 60,000 years late and not one bit less new for the wait. Newborns of 40 species took the breath the Concorde had frozen them just short of, and cried the first cry, and the recovery hulls filled with a sound no human bridge had ever expected to hear in the cold of a Concorde gallery, the sound of the galaxy's stolen beginnings finally beginning. Most of them had no kind left to return to that would know them. 60,000 years is long even for a beginning. But the freed peoples of the closing, the 9 who crewed with us by then, took them. The Sethri took the waterborne. Others took their own kind and the kinds nearest them, and where there was no near kind at all, human families took them, and there are children on Earth today, grown now, the eldest of them who began their lives in a Concord field, frozen one breath short of living, and finished that breath in the hands of a species that had crossed half the reach to let them. I went down to the hall on the last day. I had gone down for the boy at the long gallery, at the start of all of it, and I went down for the last child of the Hall of Small Beginnings, at what I knew was near the end of my own service, because I wanted the shape of the thing to close. The field went out. A small thing of a species I did not know took its first breath, 60,000 years overdue, and a young Sethri Cree woman caught it and held it up to the light pouring through the recovery bay's daylight panels, and the whole bay, humans, Sethri, the freed of 4 other peoples, went quiet and then did not go quiet, in the way a room does not go quiet when a child is born. I am an old soldier. I have seen the worst things the dark holds. I stood at the back of that bay and I watched a stolen beginning finally begin, and I thought of the curator who had told me years before, in a cold sealed room, that the Concord did not collect the ordinary. It had been right about itself and wrong about everything else. There is nothing ordinary in a first breath. The Concord had known that. It had prized these beginnings, gathered them, treasured them, and it had still frozen them short of the one thing that gave them meaning, because it could not conceive that the meaning was in the living and not in the held instant. It had loved these moments and tortured them in the same act 60,000 years and never once understood the contradiction. We understood it. That was the whole of the difference, and it was the whole of the war, and it was the reason a child of 40 peoples breathes today who would otherwise hang forever in the blue. We knew that a beginning is not a beginning until it is allowed to end the waiting and become a life. And we were the species that allowed it. There was one gallery where the Concord did more than lecture, and I have to tell it, because it is the only time across the whole of the closing that the patient ancient thing reached for a weapon, and the way that reach failed told the entire galaxy what we were. It happened in the 3rd year, at a site the Concord called the Reliquary of First Grief. We had a rhythm by then: arrive, ring the gallery in a cold sphere, open the channel, begin the survey, run the line. At the Reliquary, the survey came back wrong. The fields there were not all holding moments. Some of them, the deepest ones, were holding force. Energies the Concord had gathered and pinned across its age the way it pinned the dying, vast charges of the same harvesting science that swept up migrations and convoys, held at the instant of their fullest power and never released. The Concord had built a weapon out of its own grief, in the place it called First Grief, and it had been waiting an age to see if it would ever need to use it. It used it on us, on the 9th day at the Reliquary. With our recovery line deep into the holding of a preserved people, the Concord released the pin charges all at once, not at the people in the fields, it would never harm those, but at the closing's warships ringing the gallery, an unmaking sweep of harvesting energy designed to catch a fleet the way a field catches a migration and freeze it forever in the blue. It caught 11 of our hulls. 11 warships, crews and all, swept into the Concord's preservation in an instant, pinned at the moment of the strike, frozen in the blue light with their people aware inside. The Concord had finally done to us in the open in war the exact thing it had done to the Aldous Vane in the dark, and I understood in the half-second the readings reached my plot that it had not been able to imagine any other weapon, because freezing was the only thing its whole age had taught it to do. It was the worst moment of the closing, and it was over in under a day, and the way it ended is the thing I want remembered. We did not lose the 11 hulls. We had spent 3 years taking the Concord's preservation science apart. Lindquist's heirs in the engineering corps had built by then controlled release rigs that could open a field faster and cleaner than the Concord, could close one, and the medical hulls behind our line had been catching resuming bodies every day for 3 years. The instant the 11 ships went into the blue, the closing did to them what it had been doing to the galaxy's stolen dead. It opened the fields. It reached into the Concord's own weapon and released our people in a controlled collapse, ship by ship, with the recovery line standing by to catch them. And we brought all 11 crews back out of the blue light the Concord had pinned them in, the same day, alive. Because the one thing the Concord had never reckoned on was a species that had learned to undo the blue light faster than the Concord could make it. The patient ancient weapon of first grief, the charge the Concord had held across an age for the one enemy it feared, had landed on the only species in the dark that could open it before it closed. The Concord did not raise a weapon again after the Reliquary. It had reached at last for the only thing it had, the power to make an ending into a held forever, and it had watched us turn that power inside, out in a single day and carry our people back into the light. It understood then fully what it had only half grasped before. We were not merely willing to end things. We had become better at undoing the Concord's unending than the Concorde was at making it. The oldest collector in the dark had met a younger one that could empty any field it built, including the fields it built as weapons. And there was nothing left in 100 million years of patience that could answer that. We finished opening the reliquary of first grief 8 days later. We carried out the held people the Concorde had been guarding with the weapon. And we read the names of the 11 crews who had spent a day in the blue light and come back, not as casualties because we lost none of them, but as a record because I wanted it written down forever that the Concorde had once tried to freeze Earth's fleet, and that Earth had thawed it by sundown. The understanding came to a head once, in the 7th year, at a gallery the Concorde called the Deep Quiet, and it is the only time in the whole of the closing that I came near to firing, and the reason I did not is the reason I am telling this at all. By the 7th year, the closing was a machine. We had opened 190 galleries. We had a procedure for everything, for the field types, for the species, for the grave cases of peoples whose biology we'd had to learn from nothing. We had carried out, by then, more than 4 million living beings from the blue light, and we had read more names of the dead than I can hold in my mind. And the fleet that had started as 406 ships had grown to thousands and crossed half the reach, and still the Concorde had not fought us. It had retreated, gallery by gallery, into its oldest and deepest sites, the way an old animal retreats into its last den, and the Deep Quiet was the deepest of them. The Deep Quiet was different. The galleries we had opened until then held the takings of younger ages, peoples and moments the Concorde had collected within the span of its own long memory. The Deep Quiet held the first of it, the oldest collection. The moments the Concorde had begun with, when it was young, before the patience had hardened into the thing we came to close. And the Concorde had gathered every ship it had left, every grown and ancient hull, and ringed the Deep Quiet. And for the first time in 7 years it raised its screens. It would fight for the Deep Quiet. It would fight for nothing else, but it would fight for the place where it had become what it was. I brought the closing to a stop at the edge of the Deep Quiet's screen, the largest concentration of force my species had ever assembled in one place, and I had the guns warm for the first time since the long gallery, and I opened the channel, and the Concorde and I spoke for the last time. It did not lecture me. That was how I knew it had changed. The patient, reasonable curator's voice that had explained my crimes to me across 11 years was gone, and what spoke from inside the Deep Quiet was older and plainer, and at the last, almost human in the one thing it had finally learned. "You will open this one too," the Concorde said. "We know. We have watched you open 190. You do not tire. You do not turn aside. You are ending. And ending does not stop, and a pause, the first hesitation I had heard from it in 11 years. We did not know that when we began. We thought we had outlived ending. We thought we had solved it, the way one solves a flaw. We were wrong. There is a species that ending belongs to, and it has come, and it is you. And we cannot fight you because we do not know how. We never learned. We removed the need. That was our error. We removed ending from our understanding, and now ending has come for us, and we have no defense, because a thing that cannot conceive of an end cannot prepare for one. Open the screen if you must. But we ask, the oldest of us, who remember the beginning that is held in here, we ask whether you will hold to your own law. You told us at the first gallery that some things are supposed to end, and you are the species that ends them. We have one question left, and our whole age rests on the answer. Are we one of the things that is supposed to end? Or are we only a thing you are angry at? I sat with that. I had the guns warm and the largest force in human history at my back and 100 million years of cruelty inside that screen, and the Concorde had asked me, at the last, the only question that could have stopped me, which was whether I knew the difference between a closing and a slaughter. And I did know the difference. That was the whole of it. That was the law I had been keeping for 11 years without once saying it aloud. The law that made the closing a closing and not a vengeance. "Lower your screen," I said. "We are not going to destroy the Deep Quiet or you or your ships. We never were. Hear me, because this is the only mercy in the whole of what we have done, and it is not the kind of mercy you would have given. We did not come to end you. We came to end what you do. Those are not the same thing, and the difference is the entire distance between your kind and mine. You ended nothing, ever, and called it kindness, and made an eternity of suffering out of it. We are going to leave you alive and free, and able to go on for as long as your age is left in it. And we are going to take from you permanently the one capability you have abused. You will never again hold a living thing still. Every field in the Deep Quiet comes down today like the others. Every preservation comes open. your machines, your fields, the whole science of the long patience. We have it now, all of it, and we will see it never works again on any world, in any hand, including yours. You wanted to know if you are a thing that is supposed to end. No, you are a thing that is supposed to change, and we are the species that is going to make you. The Concorde lowered its screen. We opened the deep quiet over 11 days, the oldest collection in the dark, and we carried out the living of the first peoples the Concorde had ever taken, beings so long held that their own civilizations had risen and aged and gone quiet in the time they'd hung in the blue, and we read their names, though there was no one left who spoke their tongues, and we let them finish free in the light with our hands on them. And when the last field of the deep quiet went dark, the HFY Concorde, which had not let one thing end in 100 million years, watched its own beginning come open and resume and finish and pass, and it did not raise a hand, and it did not lecture, and it did not call it cruelty. It had finally learned what ending was. We had taught it the only way a thing like that can be taught, not by destroying it, which would only have proved that ending was the cruelty it had always claimed, but by making it stand and watch ending happen, again and again, with dignity, with names spoken, with hands held, until it understood that the thing it had spent its whole age denying was not enemy of meaning but the source of it. There is a thing I did at the end of the deep quiet that was not in any order I was given, and that the galaxy has since taken to calling the standing warning, though I never called it anything at all. It was simply the last thing left to do, and I did it, and it has held. When the deep quiet was emptied and the Concorde's oldest beginning had been let to finish, I did not leave. I had the closing hold station around the open, dark galleries, the largest assembly of the freed peoples ever gathered, and I opened the channel one final time to the whole of the HFY Concorde, every ship, every attendant, every curator still drifting among the dead exhibits we had switched off, and I delivered the only ultimatum of the entire campaign, and I delivered it without warming a single gun. The fields are open, I told them. All of them. 290 galleries. 41 peoples. Your beginning and your grief and everything you held between. It is finished. You are alive. Your ships are intact. We are leaving you exactly as we found you, in every way but one. Hear that one, because the rest of your age depends on it. You will never hold a living thing still again. Not a wound, not a breath, not a moment, not for an instant, not anywhere, not for any reason you call kindness. We have your science. We have every principle of the blue light taken apart and understood, and we have left, in this reach and in our own, the means to detect it and the means to open it faster than you can close it. You saw that at the reliquary. You know it is true. The moment any field of yours pins a single living thing, anywhere, we will know, and we will come, and we will open it, and we will not that time leave you as we found you. This is not a threat made in anger. It is a fact made in cold. We are the species that ends things, and we have left you alive specifically so that you may live a long time knowing it. You spent 100 million years believing nothing you held could ever be released. We have spent 15 disabusing you. Go on then. Live. Endure the way your kind endures, for as long as your age is left. But you will endure as a people who can no longer steal an ending, and every day of the long time you have left, you will remember that a young species came into your galleries and proved that the unending is a lie, that the blue light always goes out, and that we are the ones who will switch it off wherever it is lit. That is our warning. It does not expire. We do not either. The Concorde did not answer with a lecture. It did not answer with a weapon. After a long silence, patient, the way everything about them was patient, it answered with a single transmission, and it is the last word I ever had from them, and I have never decided whether it was surrender or understanding or simply the only thing a thing like that could say. We understand, the Concorde said. We will not hold. We have learned the ending. We will keep it now as you keep your dead in memory and let the rest go. And then the oldest power in the dark went quiet and drew its ancient ships back among its emptied galleries and did the one thing it had never done in 100 million years. It let us walk away. We did not fire a shot at the deep quiet or at the standing warning or in any of the last 4 years of opening the galleries that remained. We never needed to. The fight had gone out of the Concorde at the reliquary when it learned we could open its weapons, and the certainty had gone out of it at the first gallery when it learned we would not stop, and at the end there was nothing left to shoot. Only a chastened ancient thing watching a younger one finish the work, and a warning hung over its whole age that would never come down. That is the answer Earth gave for the Aldous vein. Not a glassed homeworld, not a Concorde burned out of the dark. Something the Concorde found harder to bear than destruction, and the galaxy found harder to forget. We left them alive and changed and watched under a warning that does not expire, having opened every door they ever shut, with our hands on every name. The closing ran 4 more years after the deep quiet, Because 290 galleries is a number you do not finish quickly even when no one is fighting you. And I saw the last of it through. Though I was an old man by the end, older than the admiral who had stood at the forward glass of his flag bridge 15 years before and watched a boy flinch in the blue light. We opened the last gallery in a system with no name far out past the edge of the surveys, where the Concord had hidden a small collection it had hoped we would never find. We found it. We always found them. 400 and some preserved moments, 3 of them human, a scout crew, lost in my great-grandfather's day, mourned and forgotten by everyone but the people who keep the rolls. We brought them out. 2 of the 3 survived. We read the name of the one who did not, a navigator named Hollis Adarinto, aloud in the light with my own voice, because I had decided long before that I would speak the last name myself. And then we switched off the last field of the long patience, and the blue light went out of the galaxy for good. 11,000 of our own at the long gallery where it began. More than 4 million of 41 peoples across the 15 years, and the dead, the ones whose wounds had no survivable other side, read by name, everyone in 41 tongues and recorded and remembered because we hold our dead in memory and let their bodies go, and that is the whole of the difference. I have been asked since whether we should have destroyed the Concorde. There are people on Earth, good people, who think we were too merciful, who look at 100 million years of shelved suffering and cannot understand why I left the curators of it alive. I understand them. I felt the pull of it myself with the guns warm at the edge of the deep quiet. But I will tell you what I told my wing commanders on the morning I decided, and what I believed to the bottom of my cold old heart. If we had destroyed the Concorde, we would have proved it right. We would have shown the patient galaxy that ending is, after all, the cruelty the Siri always said it was, a thing done in wrath, to erase, to silence, to make 100 million years into nothing. That is not what ending is. We did not come to erase the Concorde. We came to close an account, and an account is closed when the debt is paid and the door is shut, not when the debtor is destroyed. We took our people back. We took everyone's people back. We took from the Concord the one thing it could not be trusted with forever, and we left it alive and changed, and able to do with the age it has left something it never once did across the age behind it, to let things go. That is the harder thing. Any fleet can erase. It takes a colder kind of resolve to walk into the oldest cruelty in the dark, undo all of it, hold every name, and then leave the author of it alive and watching, having learned. The Concorde will outlive me. It will outlive my grandchildren. And for all the rest of its long, patient age, it will carry the memory of the years a young species came into its galleries and proved that nothing it held was permanent, that nothing is, that the blue light always, in the end, goes out, and that this is not the enemy of meaning but the price of it, the one price the Concord had refused to pay and made 11,000 of my people pay in its place. They are home now. The 10,129 and the others, the millions, scattered home across 41 peoples. The boy lived. I will end with the boy, because I started with him, and because he is the reason I can say the closing was a closing and not a vengeance. He grew up. Kwesi Boateng's family took him in. The raiding who carried him out of the cradle and walked him in circles around the bay until the screaming stopped. He grew up on Earth, under a sun with a life that runs out and a death that will come, both of them his own, both of them free. He is a man now, a doctor in the recovery service, and he goes out to the worlds the Concorde touched and helps the freed of 41 peoples learn how to live in time again. I met him once, years after. I asked him if he remembered the field. He said he remembered all of it. He said he remembered being held still in the worst second of his life for 61 years, screaming inside, unable to finish a breath, and then a human hand reaching in, and the blue light going out, and a man with a scarred chest plate holding him while time started again. I asked him if he was angry at the Concorde, after all of it. He thought about it for a long time, the way a man thinks who has been to a place none of the rest of us have been. No, he said. They thought they were saving us from the worst thing. They had it backwards. The worst thing isn't ending. He looked out the viewport at the sun, at the time passing that he had been given back. The worst thing is not being allowed to. That is the debt we came to collect, and that is the debt we collected, and that is the whole of it. 61 years they held our wounded in frozen death, and called it kindness. And we came across the dark and opened every field they had, and carried out the living of 41 peoples, and let them finish their breath as free things, and we left the curators alive to remember it, and we switched off the blue light forever. We are the species that ends things. It is the hardest thing we do and the truest, and we did it in the cold with the names spoken, with our hands on them in the light. And the light, when we are finished, stays on.